What did someone say to you that instantly made you realize their life was in danger? When I was 20 years old, I won a trip to Acapulco for 2 weeks. My cousin, also 20, and I traveled the day after Christmas. The first week had already passed when her little brother, 17 years old, unexpectedly surprised us by showing up saying he was able to get a cheap airline ticket and wanted to spend the last week we were there with us. Our first week in Acapulco, my cousin and I had been partying, living it up. Most often not returning to our condo until around dawn. So by week 2 we were a lot more chill and wanted to go to sleep much earlier. But, my younger cousin had just arrived, spread his wings and was ready to go. That night we went out to dinner with him, showed him around a bit, and then later when the disco opened up around midnight we went with him. About 2 a.m. we decided we were tired and wanted to go back to our condo. We told him, listen, we are really tired and want to go back and go to sleep. We don't want to be your mother here, but we want you to promise us that you will take a taxi back to the condo the whole way, no exceptions. He promised and we returned to our room. Later that night while we were sleeping the phone rang and I answered it. It was the night doorman / front desk man who was on duty checking to make sure you were a guest at the condo before he buzzed the guests in through the gate that surrounded the property. In broken English, he said, please come, your brother needs help. I imagined he probably had gotten drunk and maybe the elevator wasn't working. This frequently happened. I told his sister, I will go down and help him up. I went down and laying on the concrete by the pool, in front of the door that opened through the gate to condo, I saw my cousin. Upon seeing him I was a little mad, suspecting he might be playing a practical joke on me, and I was not amused. I walked over to him and said, Jay, what is going on? He replied, I think I have been stabbed. It was clear seeing his face he was not well. Then he tried but failed to get up because he needed to go to the bathroom. I told him, don't move. He yelled, I have to, I need to poop bad. I replied, I don't care, do not move if you have to, go in your pants, just don't move. It was then he weakly began whispering to me, Shonda, I want you to know how much I love you, I need you to tell my sister how much I love her. Growing up with you guys and our memories together mean everything to me. Tears glistened in his eyes. At that moment I knew his life was in extreme jeopardy. Turns out my cousin had taken a taxi, but he had also seen that his sister and I always negotiated our price before we got in and would not go above certain amounts for a taxi. The driver agreed to a certain amount and my cousin got in and was heading back to the condo. Our condo was a block off the main drag on a side street with lots of big trees. When the driver got to the point where our street began, he told my cousin it would cost more. My cousin said, no way, you agreed to a certain price. But the driver retorted to bad, money or get out. My cousin, inebriated, got out and walked the rest of the way. He was at the door in front of the gate of our condo when he heard someone from behind him asking a question. He thought. He turned and the guy lunged for my cousin's Velcro watch, not even a nice one. The robber also had an ice pick in his hand. The robber began struggling with my cousin, who was yelling. All of this, thankfully, was taking place in front of the door in the gate to our condo. The condo employee who was on duty saw what was happening in a mirror over the gate he used to see who was coming and going and who too led into the condo. The doorman went to help my cousin. As he opened the door, the robber thrust the ice pick into my cousin's chest. The doorman began dragging my cousin inside and pushing the attacker off as the attacker tried again to stab with the ice pick whomever he could. After assessing my cousin was most likely stabbed, I went to ask the doorman, who was about 15 feet away from me in a glass-walled office, who he was calling, as he was on the phone. He told me the police. I said, forget the police, call an ambulance. A doctor arrived in an old VW bug. He came in and checked my cousin's pulse, immediately asserting, we have to go right now, there is no time to lose. I was only wearing a short Victoria's Secret nightgown, thankfully a pretty modest one, and didn't even have shoes on. I said, I need to get clothes on, and the doctor replied, he doesn't have time for you to get clothes on, must go right now. My cousin's sister had come down by now. She also was without shoes and in a short Victoria's Secret nightgown. We piled into the doctor's VW and he raced at top speed like a bat out of hell to the hospital. On the way, he told us that my cousin's pulse was weak and thready. He had to have medical attention immediately. By then we also had seen the small puncture wound to his chest. Arriving at the hospital, the doctor quickly carried my cousin inside and left us to find our way to the waiting room. We were there for a while and some Canadian girls came in. They had brought their friend in because they thought someone had drugged her drink. We began talking with them, sharing our experience too. After a while longer, a man walked in that we had never seen before, and he walked right over to where we were with the Canadian girls and asked, what's going on? He asked us in such a familiar way that we thought he must know the Canadian girls, and so we told him what was going on and they did too. He then just walked away deeper into the hospital. It was then we realized none of us knew who this man was. The Canadian girls had also mistakenly thought we knew him by the way he acted. After what seemed like a long time, he came back and reporting to us he had checked in on my cousin and spoke to the doctors, announcing, it looks like you are going to be here a while. I will go and get you food, what would you like? Then he left. He later returned with food and drinks, and one of the Canadian girls asked him to get her cigarettes, so he left again. While he was gone the second time, the doctors came and got my cousin and me. They took us into a room, showed us chest x-rays and told us that my cousin had indeed been stabbed in the chest, but that we were fortunate because while it had punctured the sac around his heart, it hadn't actually punctured his heart. They said what they had to do was insert a needle into his chest area and drain off the blood that was pooling and forming a clot there. We returned to the waiting room and less than 15 minutes later they called us back again. This time they divulged that they had been wrong. Not only had the sac around his heart been punctured, his heart indeed also been punctured, and they must do emergency open heart surgery immediately. The doctors were worried about doing it though because he was 17 years old and his parents were not there. But articulated the surgery was urgently needed, so they were going to go ahead anyway. However, they informed us, this is a private hospital and we cannot start until you have paid for this surgery ahead of time. We were astonished, thinking, what? How can we do that? Then asking, will you take his medical insurance? They told us that his USA insurance wouldn't work there in Mexico.